Hello everyone. Tonight is a special night, one that's all about embracing fear. I invite you to step into a world where the unknown is in charge, where shadows conceal secrets, and every little noise feels like a whisper from another realm. For the next hour, I'll take you through some truly chilling tales, each one more unsettling than the one before. These aren't just stories. They are experiences that will shake your sense of security, make you question what you know, and blur the line between reality and imagination. As you listen, keep in mind that darkness is closer than you might think. Once you embark on this journey, there's no going back. These tales are designed to twist your mind, making you second-guess every creak of the floor, every flicker of light, and any movement you spot out of the corner of your eye. Each story will add to the last, building a wave of fear that will linger long after everything goes dark. So, if you're brave enough, get comfortable and let the fear wash over you. Don't think you can just hit pause and escape if it gets too overwhelming. No, tonight will keep you on the edge of your seat, because once you start this journey, you'll want to see how it unfolds. Will you make it through the horror? Or will you find yourself woven into the tale? Let's discover it together. The nightmare starts now. On a hot and muggy summer day, Kevin and Anna arrived at an old Victorian house with their daughter, Sarah. The house loomed over them, its gray paint chipped, shutters broken, and vines creeping up its sides. It sat on a piece of land so wild it felt as if nature had taken over. They had moved to this quiet spot in the countryside to escape the chaos of city life, seeking peace and room to breathe. 10-year-old Sarah, full of energy and curiosity, was not thrilled about leaving her bustling neighborhood and friends. But as she stepped out of the car and gazed at the imposing house, a mix of curiosity and fear washed over her, sending a shiver down her spine despite the summer heat. Right from the start, the house seemed to resist their arrival. While unpacking, doors opened and closed on their own. Strange sounds echoed from the attic, and the air inside felt oddly cool compared to the hot summer sun outside. Sarah's room, located in the house's farthest corner on the second floor, felt particularly strange. With its old floral wallpaper peeling away, the lone window looked out over a dark, dense forest that seemed to swallow the light. As Sarah unpacked, she thought she saw movement among the trees, figures flitting between them. But when she looked again, there was nothing there. She shrugged it off, chalking it up to her imagination. The first week went by without major incidents, but it wasn't long before the house's quirks became hard to ignore. Every morning, Kevin discovered the front door slightly open, even though he was sure he had locked it. Anna complained of hearing faint whispers near the old grandfather clock in the hallway. Late at night, Sarah began waking up to soft humming, a lullaby that seemed to come from the very walls. When she told her parents, they dismissed her concerns, believing it was simply the sounds of an old house settling. But this house was more than just old. It felt alive. One evening, while they were gathered in the living room, a sudden chill swept through, extinguishing the lights. Kevin fumbled to light a candle as Anna held Sarah close. As the flickering light illuminated the room, they were struck by a chilling sight. Family portraits that had been blank when they arrived now showed faces of strangers with wide, unblinking eyes and eerie smiles. Quick to act, Kevin took the portraits down, but Sarah felt as if the eyes were still watching her as she left the room. Just a week later, Sarah disappeared. That it was a stormy night, the wind howling and rain slamming against the windows with fury. Sarah had gone to bed early, clutching her favorite stuffed bear. Meanwhile, Kevin and Anna sat in the living room, quietly discussing the strange happenings in the house. Suddenly, a piercing scream shattered the calm, piercing through the storm. They dashed to Sarah's room, but when they opened the door, it was empty. The bed was unmade, the window stood wide open, and the curtains danced wildly in the wind. "Sarah," Anna cried out, panic flooding her voice. Kevin leaned out the window, desperately searching the yard below, but their daughter was nowhere to be found. The storm made visibility nearly impossible, while the forest loomed like an impenetrable wall of darkness. As they searched the house, terror grew within them. The walls seemed to pulse as if they were breathing. Shadows darted in the corners, forming shapes that hinted at humanity but weren't quite right. Kevin thought he heard Sarah's voice faintly calling from the basement, but when they creaked down the stairs, all they found was an old, rusted boiler and stacks of rotting wood. In the days that followed, Kevin and Anna's frantic search for Sarah became more desperate. The house seemed to play tricks on them. Sarah's laughter echoed through the halls, but sounded distorted, like a broken record. Her toys appeared in odd places, the bear on the dining table, her doll at the foot of their bed. The forest outside seemed to inch closer each day, its shadows reaching for the house like grasping hands. One night, they stumbled upon a hidden door behind a bookshelf in the study. It led to a narrow, spiraling staircase that vanished into darkness. Armed with a flashlight, they ventured down, feeling the air grow colder with each step. At the bottom, they discovered a room that felt ancient, with walls covered in strange symbols carved into the stone. In the center of the room sat a wooden chair, and on it, Sarah's stuffed bear, its button eyes staring into emptiness. As they approached, the room vibrated, and a low growl filled the air. The symbols on the walls began to glow, casting an eerie red light. When Kevin reached for the bear, the chair burst into flames, and the growl turned into a deafening roar. They dashed back up the stairs, hearing footsteps behind them. But when they looked back, there was nothing there. As time passed, the house became darker and more oppressive. Mirrors reflected impossible sights. Sarah wandering through an endless hallway, her face pale with fear. Kevin and Anna frozen in place while shadowy figures loomed close behind. Food spoiled instantly, clocks stopped, and the walls wept a thick black liquid that reeked of decay. Kevin became obsessed with understanding the symbols from the hidden room, believing they held the key to finding Sarah. Anna, on the other hand, began hearing her daughter's voice in dreams, crying for help and warning her not to trust the house. Then, one night, Kevin vanished. Anna discovered his notes scattered around the study, filled with frantic scribbles and drawings of the symbols they'd seen. The final page held just one sentence: "She's here, but I can't save her." Now left alone, Anna spiraled into despair. The house closed in on her, its hallways stretching endlessly, its doors leading nowhere. She caught glimpses of Kevin in the mirrors, his eyes hollow and accusing. She heard Sarah's laughter followed by agonizing screams. Drawn back to the hidden room, where the symbols now glowed brighter than ever, she stepped inside, only for the door to slam shut behind her, plunging her into darkness. Something cold and wet coiled around her ankles, pulling her down. She screamed, but the sound vanished into the void. The last image burned into her mind was Sarah's face, filled with sorrow, whispering, "I told you not to trust it." Now, the house stands empty, waiting for its next occupants, its secrets cloaked in shadows, ever hungry. On a cold, moonless night in October, 6 high school friends, Aria, Maria, Jack, Belle, Ben, and Fiona, headed toward the edge of the Forbidden Forest. This place had a spooky reputation, rumored to be home to Ashbourne House, an old, abandoned mansion wrapped in creepy tales. The forest had always been a source of mystery in their town, with its tangled trees and dark corners sparking whispers of strange vanishings and ghost sightings. Ashbourne House had sat empty for many years, its last owners having disappeared without a trace, leading people to believe it was cursed, haunted by restless spirits. But for Aria, who loved an adventure, and her friends, it was just the perfect opportunity. They were determined to stay a night in the house and uncover the truth behind the stories they had heard, convinced they would find nothing more than old myths. As they entered the dense, shadowy forest, the temperature dropped, and a heavy silence settled around them. No birds chirped or insects buzzed. Only the sound of their footsteps crunching on dry leaves broke the stillness. The deeper they ventured, the more oppressive the surroundings felt. The trees seemed to encircle them, and the mist that rolled in from the forest floor enveloped them, like a thick blanket. At last, they reached the house, its tall structure emerging from the fog like a relic from another era. The broken windows and sagging roof gave it a forlorn look, while the heavy wooden door that stood ajar creaked ominously, as if inviting them inside. Unfazed by the eerie sight, Arya stepped through the doorway and into the grand, decaying foyer. The air was filled with the musty scent of damp wood and decay, and the once lovely wallpaper drooped in strips, revealing walls covered in mold. A grand staircase twisted upward, its banister broken and crooked. Their flashlights flickered as they swept the room, illuminating cobwebs, dusty furniture, and the occasional cracked mirror reflecting their uncertain faces. Overcoming the rising sense of dread, Arya suggested they split up. "We'll find more that way, and I'm sure something interesting will turn up," she said, her voice a bit shaky despite her bravado. The group hesitantly agreed, forming pairs. Arya and Maria went upstairs. Jack and Fiona descended into the basement, while Belle and Ben stayed on the ground floor to check out the main hall. That is, Arya and Maria climbed the staircase. The air felt colder, wrapping them in an unsettling hush. They reached the top and wandered down a narrow corridor lined with forgotten rooms. One door creaked open, revealing a large bedroom that appeared untouched for years. Furniture lay beneath white sheets, and dust coated everything in sight. It was so quiet until Arya spotted something odd. A full-length mirror loomed against the far wall, its surface cracked and aged. When Arya directed her flashlight at the mirror, both she and Maria froze. In the reflection, they saw themselves, but there was also a third figure lurking in the corner, its face hidden in shadow. Maria gasped, her heart racing, and clutched Arya's arm. "Can you see that?" she whispered. Arya turned quickly, but the room behind her was empty. The mirror still held the figure, which seemed to twist unnaturally. Before they could react, the shadow in the mirror reached out, and the glass rippled like water. With a loud, deafening crack, the mirror shattered, sending shards scattering across the floor. Darkness engulfed the room, and both girls screamed in fright. Meanwhile, Jack and Fiona were making their own unsettling discoveries in the basement. It felt even heavier down there, with damp walls and shelves overflowing with old jars, dusty books, and strange objects that belonged in another time. As they explored, Fiona found a journal tucked away on a dusty table. She opened it and began reading aloud, her voice shaky. The entries were disturbing, most written in a frantic scrawl. "Do not disturb the silence. They're always watching." Jack frowned, skeptical, but as Fiona continued, the words seemed to shift and blur. The air thickened, and a low growl reverberated from deep within the house. Suddenly, Jack's flashlight flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. The growling intensified, and the shelves began to rattle, as if something was pushing from behind. Startled, Fiona dropped the journal, and the growl erupted into a thunderous roar. The lights above flickered wildly, casting chaotic shadows down on the ground floor. Belle and Ben wandered the parlor, their footsteps barely audible over the dust. Belle felt a shiver run down her spine as she noticed an old, tarnished mirror on the wall. At first it seemed normal, but then she saw it. The reflection showed the chandelier swaying ominously, though in reality, it hung still. The shadows in the corners of the room elongated and reached toward them. "Ben, look at this," Belle said, her voice trembling. He glanced over, frowning. "It's just a mirror," he replied dismissively. But just then, the chandelier jerked violently, sending crystals crashing to the floor like shattered glass. They ducked just in time as the chandelier fell, shards skittering around them. In a panic, they tried to reach the main hall, but the house had other ideas. The door slammed shut with a thunderous bang, trapping them inside. The house seemed to come alive, its walls shifting as if breathing. Shadows emerged from the floor, forming tall, twisted figures with glowing eyes. Their limbs were grotesque. Distorted laughter echoed, and the temperature plummeted. The walls oozed a thick, black liquid, spreading over everything like a dark tide. The group, now back together in the hall, found themselves with no way out. Every door they tried only led them to the same room, more distorted each time. Desperate to escape, they raced through the hallways, but the house stretched endlessly before them. Each corner showed twisted reflections of themselves in mirrors that didn't mimic their movements. Terror gripped them as the walls closed in, shadowy figures reaching out to seize them, pulling them into the darkness. Arya, Maria, Jack, Belle, Ben, and Fiona were lost to the house, their screams swallowed by its wicked halls. As morning came, silence returned to the house, its eerie presence waiting for the next group of unsuspecting souls to wander in. Ashbourne House stood in the mist, its windows dark and empty, its doors waiting patiently for those brave or foolish enough to enter. The legend would grow, and the house would await its next unwitting victims. Emma and Thomas, a young couple, had always been passionate about antiques. Their favorite activity was exploring antique markets, searching for rare and fascinating items that each had a story. One Saturday, they discovered a charming little market tucked away in a less traveled part of the city. The air was filled with the scents of old wood, leather, and dust. This hidden gem was filled with vendors selling everything from vintage furniture to peculiar trinkets. Among all the treasures, one item stood out: a large, beautifully decorated mirror framed with detailed carvings of angels and roses. The glass had a slight fog to it, and the frame showed signs of age, giving it a unique character. There was something captivating about it that drew them in despite its imperfections. "It's stunning," Emma said softly, her fingers tracing the frame. Thomas felt the same pull and nodded in agreement. The vendor, an elderly man with a distant look, noticed their interest. "It's an old piece," he said, his voice raspy. "It's been in my family for generations. There aren't many left like it." He gazed at them intently. "Just be careful. Mirrors can reflect things that aren't always of this world." Emma chuckled nervously, dismissing his words as just a superstition. They bought the mirror, eager to add this unique find to their collection. When they got home, they placed the mirror in their living room, close to a window so it could catch the light. That night, with the sun setting, Emma sat on the couch, gazing at the mirror. Suddenly, she noticed a faint shadowy figure in its reflection, standing behind her. She turned quickly, but the room was empty. Her heart raced, yet she tried to convince herself it was just a trick of the light. Still, an unsettling feeling lingered. In the following days, she couldn't shake the odd sense of unease surrounding the mirror. It felt almost alive, showing her different things each time she looked into it. Flickers of movement, strange shapes, and even scenes from a dark, decaying room she didn't recognize, with peeling wallpaper and a gloomy atmosphere. One evening, as Thomas sat beside her, he noticed it too. While they were watching TV, he caught a glimpse of a figure in the reflection, a pale woman with hidden features, standing silently right behind Emma. He turned to her in alarm, but the room was still, and Emma was alone. He grasped her arm, his voice shaking. "Did you see that?" he asked. Emma, flustered and confused, shook her head. "I thought I did, but I'm not sure." From that moment, things only grew more unsettling. Emma began to hear strange sounds at night, whispers, light knocks, and the unmistakable creak of floorboards in empty rooms. At first, she assumed it was all in her mind, but the noises persisted, sometimes seeming to come from right behind her in the living room. One evening, feeling overwhelmed, Emma faced the mirror, staring into its cloudy depths. At first, nothing happened, but as she focused, the room behind her shifted. The reflection showed a dark, dusty version of her living room, with cracked walls and scattered furniture. And then she saw it, a shadow in the corner, watching her. Tall and thin, its face shrouded in darkness. A chill ran down her spine as the whispering grew louder, calling her name in a voice that wasn't hers. Terrified, she stepped back, but when she looked again, everything seemed normal. Thomas walked in, noticing her distress. "What's going on?" "You look scared," he said, trying to soothe her. She struggled to explain. It felt real. the shadow, the unsettling reflection that as time passed, the mirror's presence felt increasingly ominous. The house itself began to feel different, darker and colder, as if something was pressing in. One night, Emma woke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Thinking it was Thomas, she got up, but as she stepped into the hallway, the temperature dropped and the air felt thick. She glanced down the hall and saw her reflection standing in front of the mirror at the far end. But it didn't look right. Her reflection was pale, eyes wide with fear, and behind her was that same tall figure, now with a grotesque grin. Emma gasped, stumbling back, but when she looked again at the mirror, the figure had vanished. She rushed to Thomas, waking him. "We have to get rid of it," she said breathlessly. "It's not safe." Thomas agreed, though he looked shaken. They decided to cover the mirror with a blanket, hoping to put an end to whatever darkness had settled in their home. But that night, the blanket was gone. The mirror stood there, exposed again, while the room felt colder and shadowy. Eerie whispers filled the air, becoming more frantic. As they watched in horror, the reflection morphed once more. Instead of showing their living room, it displayed a twisted version of it, everything strangely inverted. Shadows danced and shifted, forming lurking shapes, and the ghostly woman reappeared, her face contorted in a terrifying grimace. Emma and Thomas could hear her breathing, heavy and labored, as the temperature dropped even further. In panic, they rushed to the door, but the handle wouldn't move. The house felt like it was trapping them. They ran to the back door, but it was locked too, with the keys nowhere in sight. The last thing they saw in the reflection before they managed to escape was the woman's face, inches from the glass, her empty eyes staring right at them. That night, they left everything behind, their home and the cursed mirror. They never spoke of it again, but sometimes they would hear whispers, feel sudden chills, or catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of their eyes. And the mirror, left behind in the deserted corner of the house, waited quietly for its next victim, its dark secrets ready to be revealed again. Emma and Mark, a couple in their late 20s, had always enjoyed the excitement of road trips and discovering new places. One chilly autumn evening, they decided to venture into the thick forest near their town, hoping for an adventure off the usual path. They had heard whispers of an abandoned restaurant hidden deep in the woods, a place few dared to visit. Those who did spoke of odd happenings and unsettling sights. Intrigued, Emma and Mark drove down an old, overgrown road, their headlights piercing through the darkness of the trees. After what felt like a long time, they spotted something ahead, a crumbling building that seemed to have appeared from nowhere. It was big, with a weathered sign above the door that read "The Hollow Oak." The place looked ancient, with cracked windows, splintered wooden beams, and ivy crawling up the walls like a dark veil. It stood out against the wild surroundings, as if time had forgotten it. "Is this it?" Emma asked softly, filled with wonder. Mark, looking both curious and a bit anxious, nodded. "This must be the place." They parked the car, and despite a strange feeling churning in their stomachs, they approached the entrance. The door creaked open, almost inviting them in, but the inside was empty. A musty smell hit them as they stepped inside, the floorboards creaking beneath their weight. The light from their flashlight revealed an old dining room, with faded wallpaper, cracked chairs, and tables covered in dust. Cobwebs hung from the chandeliers, and an eerie silence surrounded them. Still, there was a peculiar warmth about the place, compelling them to explore. Emma shivered slightly, but Mark, eager to see more, took the lead. "It's strangely charming," he said, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "It's so odd," Emma replied, glancing at the crooked black and white photos on the walls. Images of families dining, smiling faces, yet their eyes seemed vacant, as if time had frozen them. They wandered deeper into the restaurant, their footsteps echoing, when they suddenly heard a soft, haunting piano melody. It seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once, sending chills down their spines. "Who's playing the piano?" Emma whispered. Mark scanned the room, his heart racing. "There's no one here," he said, brow furrowed. Just then, the music grew louder, clearer. They spun around, and there he was, an unfamiliar figure seated at an old grand piano, his back to them. Dressed in a dark suit, he didn't seem to move, his pale hands resting on the keys without pressing down. His back was hunched, head bowed, hidden in shadows. Mark's heart raced. Who is that?" Emma stammered. Before Mark could answer, the music stopped, and the figure turned slowly toward them. They froze. His face was hidden by a dark hood, obscuring any features. A chill ran down their spines as they stood frozen in shock. Then, without a word, he stood, walked past them, and vanished behind a heavy curtain. The atmosphere thickened as they stood there, uncertain of what had just happened. Emma's heart raced as she grabbed Mark's arm. "We need to leave," she urged. But just as they tried to head for the door, it slammed shut with a thunderous bang, trapping them inside. Panic surged through them as they rushed to the windows, finding them all sealed tight, layers of grime covering the glass. "What's going on?" Mark muttered, his voice trembling. "I don't know," Emma whispered, breath quickening. "This place feels wrong." They stepped back from the windows and turned around, searching for another exit, but the atmosphere began to shift. The restaurant walls seemed to twist and morph, shadows deepening in an unsettling way. The air turned colder, and a low growl echoed from within the building. Emma gasped, gripping Mark's arm. "What was that?" Mark said nothing. Instead, he pulled her toward a narrow hallway they hadn't noticed before, leading to wooden stairs. "We should find another way out. There must be something upstairs." As they climbed the stairs, the air grew thick, the chill almost unbearable. The growling intensified, echoing through the walls, as if the building itself were alive, writhing in discomfort. At the top, they found a long hallway filled with closed doors. One door at the end was slightly ajar, and they could make out soft whispers beckoning them inside. Emma's heart raced. "Mark, I don't think we should," but Mark moved closer, drawn by an unknown force. "We have to see what's in there," he said, his voice sounding distant, as if he were losing himself. Emma tried to pull him back, but he pushed the door open. A blast of icy air rushed out, carrying a stench of decay, like rotten wood and mold. Inside, their flashlight illuminated a long table set with faded dishes, their surfaces cracked and dusty. But what shocked them were the figures sitting still around the table, eyes wide open and empty, as if frozen in terror. Dressed in tattered clothes, their skin was pale and stretched, mouths slightly ajar, as if caught in a moment of fear. In the center of the table stood a large, darkened mirror, reflecting nothing but an endless void that seemed to draw them closer. Emma stepped back in horror. "We need to leave now," she insisted, but when she turned, the door had vanished, replaced by a solid wall. "We're trapped," she gasped. Mark stood transfixed, staring at the mirror. "Mark!" Emma shouted, shaking his arm. But when her hand touched him, he felt cold, as if all life had drained from him. His eyes, once filled with fear, were now hollow like the figures at the table. He turned to her, his expression blank. "Emma," he spoke in a voice that wasn't his. "You should have stayed away." Shadows in the room shifted and dark forms reached out toward them. The air thickened, suffocating them as the whispers surrounded them. In that moment, Emma realized the restaurant wasn't just a building. It was a trap, a prison for lost souls. It fed on fear, luring people in with the promise of a meal, only to consume their spirits and keep them there forever. As darkness enveloped her, Emma screamed, her voice lost in the chaotic whispers. The last thing she saw was Mark, standing still, eyes vacant, his essence already claimed by the restaurant. The hollow oak waited, patient and hungry, for new visitors to engulf, adding to its collection of lost souls forever trapped in the shadows of its haunted halls. In a quiet town surrounded by thick woods and gentle hills, there was an old, crumbling manor at the end of a forgotten road. People in the area often talked about the house, its past shrouded in mystery, and the odd happenings that seemed to follow anyone who dared to get close. This manor, called Blackthorn House, had been left empty for many years. Yet on nights when the moon shone bright, flickering lights from its shattered windows hinted that the house might still be full of life. One summer evening, a young woman named Claire, who had just graduated from college, arrived in this small town. She was in search of peace and a place to write, wanting to escape the noise of the city. Claire found a cozy little cottage at the town's edge and spent her days wandering the nearby hills and forests. However, it wasn't long before the stories about Blackthorn House caught her attention. The tales were captivating, especially the one about the family who had vanished mysteriously one night, leaving behind only the eerie house and their unsettling legacy. Curiosity got the better of Claire. Even though she felt a bit uneasy, she decided to go see the manor. She thought the place would inspire her writing, a perfect backdrop to capture its haunting beauty. With just a flashlight and her camera, she ventured out on a cool evening, her footsteps crunching on the gravel as she approached the iron gates of Blackthorn House. When she pushed them open, the wind picked up, feeling unusually cold, and she heard a distant creaking sound from inside the house. As she walked closer, the manor rose up before her, dark and intimidating, its broken windows watching like hollow eyes. A shiver ran down Claire's spine, and for a moment, her instincts urged her to turn back. But curiosity pulled her forward. She stepped onto the creaky porch and reached for the door, which surprisingly opened with a long, eerie creak, revealing the dark interior. For a moment, she hesitated, but then pushed aside her fear and went inside. The air was heavy and stale, as if the house had been locked away for ages. Dust danced in the weak light filtering through the cracks, and old furniture, shrouded in white sheets, laid abandoned. Claire's footsteps echoed in the silence, and a chill swept over her that wasn't just from the cold. The deeper she ventured, the more she felt a presence, and soon, soft whispers filled the air, so faint, she wondered if she was imagining them. But when she paused to listen, they grew louder, quickening her heart. The whispers seemed to come from the end of the hallway. Driven by both fear and curiosity, Claire walked toward the sound, her flashlight trembling in her hand. Turning a corner, she stumbled into what looked like an old study, lined with dusty bookshelves. At the far end stood a grand mirror, its frame twisted and dark, as if it were alive. Suddenly, the whispers sharpened into a clear voice calling her name. "Claire, Claire, come closer." A chill crawled up her spine as she felt an urge to step forward, drawn by an unseen force toward the mirror. In its reflection, she caught sight of not just herself, but strange, fleeting shadows flitting about. Something seemed to linger just behind her, hidden in the corners. Then, the whispering abruptly stopped, replaced by a loud bang followed by footsteps above her. Claire's heart raced, and she turned quickly, expecting to see someone, but the house remained empty. The footsteps grew louder, as though something was descending the stairs. Panic surged through her as she rushed for the door, but before she could reach it, the mirror began to crack, the surface splintering into delicate patterns. Gasping, Claire stepped back, but the crack spread wide, and for a fleeting moment, she saw a dark figure in the reflection, tall and thin, with glowing red eyes, a shape that was not her own, looming just behind her. She whirled around, but the room was vacant. When she looked back at the mirror, the figure had vanished. The whispers returned, louder and more frantic, and the air filled with voices, all calling her name. Suddenly, the floor shook, and the house seemed to groan in distress. The door slammed shut with a thunderous crash, trapping Claire inside. The shadows stretched out, reaching for her like skeletal hands. Her flashlight flickered and went out, plunging her into darkness. Heart pounding, Claire stumbled back, but the shadows closed in, blocking her escape. She sensed a chilling breath on her neck, but when she turned, there was nothing. Then she heard the voice again, this time almost a growl. "You shouldn't have come." Claire turned toward the voice, but the room was empty again, and the whispers had faded. Only her breathing and the rapid beat of her heart filled the silence. She tried the door again, but it wouldn't move. The walls seemed to press in closer, the house alive and and feeding off her terror. The whispers returned, now deafening, and Claire realized far too late that this house was not just deserted. It was hungry. The mirror, now fully cracked, glimmered with an unsettling light. Claire glanced into it one final time, only to see her reflection smirk maliciously back at her, a dark smile spreading across her face. As the shadows enveloped her, the last thing she noticed was her reflection stepping out of the mirror, its eyes filled with a primal hunger. She understood, far too late, that Blackthorn House was more than just a shell. It trapped the living and devoured their souls, one after another, thriving on their fear. The following morning, the town buzzed with whispers and rumors. Claire had vanished without a trace. Blackthorn House stood silent, its broken windows gazing down at the empty road, awaiting its next guest. One chilly autumn evening, 6 friends, Jake, Claire, Lila, Ethan, Hannah, and Max, made the bold choice to explore the infamous Ravenwood Mansion. This spooky old place had been around for centuries, nestled deep in the woods on the town's edge. It was infamous for its dark history, with tales of mysterious disappearances and strange sounds swirling around it. Ignoring the town's warnings, the adventurous group was eager to uncover something supernatural. As they neared the mansion, a sense of foreboding filled the air, and its shadow loomed over the barren ground. The rusty gate creaked ominously as they pushed it open, stepping into what many believed was a haunted space. The mansion stood eerily still, its windows dark and lifeless, as though it were holding its breath, waiting for them to enter. Their flashlights flickered, casting an unsettling glow over the ancient building as they cautiously stepped inside. The front door, seemingly ripped from its frame, moved slightly in the breeze. "Here goes nothing," Jake declared, trying to sound brave, though his voice wavered just a bit. Once they were inside, the mansion felt heavy with darkness and silence, the air thick with age and decay. Each creak of the floorboards seemed to echo, as if the house knew they were there. The once grand foyer lay in shambles, with shards of glass strewn across the floor and peeling yellow wallpaper hinting at its former glory. As they made their way through the rooms, they discovered a large piano in the corner of the living room, its keys discolored and warped from years of neglect. Ethan, the jokester of the group, dared Jake to play it. Jake hesitated, but when his fingers touched the keys, an eerie melody began to play by itself, filling the mansion with a haunting tune. The air felt heavier with each note, and the shadows in the corners appeared to darken, as if alive. The unsettling sound of the piano captivated them, and they couldn't look away. A chill swept through the room, sending shivers down their spines. Lila, the skeptic of the group, spoke up first. "This isn't right," she said, her voice trembling. "We should leave, right now." But just as she turned to leave, the temperature in the room dropped further, and a low, creepy sound echoed from the upper floors. It was like something heavy was dragging across the floor, followed by faint, slow footsteps that felt too close for comfort. The friends froze, their hearts racing. "It's just the house settling," Jake said, trying to brush off the fear, but even he couldn't shake the looming dread hanging over him. Out of nowhere, the front door slammed shut with a thunderous bang, trapping them inside. The very walls seemed to groan as the house shifted around them. Panic set in as they rushed toward the exit, only to find the door firmly shut, as if something, or someone, was holding it closed. As they struggled to push it open, a soft, eerie laughter floated down from above, echoing through the halls. It didn't sound human. It felt darker, menacing. "This isn't a joke, guys," Max said, his voice shaky. "We seriously need to get out of here." With nerves on high alert, they cautiously moved further into the house, feeling increasingly watched. When they reached the stairs, the floor shuddered violently under them, and a shadowy figure appeared at the top. It stood tall and impossibly thin, its face hidden in darkness. The friends froze, hearts pounding, and just as suddenly as it appeared, the figure vanished. "Did anyone else see that?" Claire whispered, but the others could only nod in fear, unable to find their voices. The house had transformed into a maze, with hallways twisting in disorienting ways, as if trying to keep them trapped. They stumbled upon an old study, the door barely hanging on its hinges. Inside, dusty, forgotten books lined the walls. On the desk lay a leather-bound journal. Jake picked it up and flipped through the pages, his eyes widening in disbelief. The journal chronicled the mansion's past, the Carrington family, and their horrifying experiments with the dark arts. It revealed how the Carringtons had sought immortality through dark rituals and had summoned spirits from beyond. They succeeded, but the results were catastrophic. The spirits trapped in the house had taken over, turning it into a prison for their souls. The Carringtons mysteriously vanished, leaving no trace, while the restless spirits remained inside the mansion forever. That a cold draft swept through the room, causing the pages of the journal to flutter wildly until stopping on a page marked with a strange symbol. Suddenly, the temperature plummeted, and a loud crash echoed from above, followed by what sounded like footsteps racing across the upper floor. Instinctively, the group rushed up the stairs, their steps reverberating through the silence. At the top, they found a room filled with an unnatural flickering light. In the center stood a large, cracked mirror, weathered by time. But when they looked into it, their hearts dropped. Instead of their own reflections, they saw the terrified faces of the Carrington family, their eyes wide in fear, mouths silently screaming for help. As they stared in horror, the mirror pulsed, and the figures began to move, reaching out toward them. "We have to get out, right now!" Jake yelled, but it was too late. The room felt like it was closing in, the mirror distorting as if it were alive. The cold, bony hands of the figures almost touched them. With a terrified scream, they turned to flee, but the house shifted around them, the walls closing in and doors vanishing. The laughter returned, echoing louder as the spirits of the Carrington family and the dark forces they had unleashed began to claim the teenagers, one by one. By morning, when the sun rose, the mansion was silent once more, and Jake, Claire, Lila, Ethan, Hannah, and Max were gone forever. The townspeople would talk about them for years to come, but no one would dare approach Ravenwood Mansion again. The house still stands, waiting for the next curious souls to enter, never to return. On a chilly winter night, 5 teens, Sophia, Marcus, Lily, John, and Ben, made a choice to explore an old, deserted house on the outskirts of town. This house had been vacant for years, windows boarded up and walls crumbling, and it carried a spooky reputation whispered about for ages. People said that the spirit of a young girl who had mysteriously disappeared long ago haunted the place, and some claimed her ghost still wandered, seeking revenge. But the friends weren't drawn in by ghost tales or the creepy vibe. What really intrigued them was a strange story about a vintage doll that belonged to the girl. Rumor had it that this doll, which was found in her room after her disappearance, was no ordinary toy. It had eyes that seemed to follow anyone who looked at it and was rumored to even move by itself. Wanting to debunk the myths, the friends bravely stepped into the house on a freezing night, their breaths visible in the chilly air. When they pushed the creaky door open, it groaned as if inviting them inside. Dust hung thick in the air, and the house was silent except for a faint creaking noise coming from above. They navigated through dark hallways, the floorboards protesting under their feet, until they reached the room where the doll was said to be kept. The space was small with peeling wallpaper, and in the center stood a wooden cabinet with glass doors. Inside was the doll, its porcelain face cracked and yellowed over time, with dark, unblinking eyes that as they drew closer, the room felt colder, and a heavy sense of dread washed over them. Lily, known for her lighthearted jokes, dared John to open the cabinet. Laughing nervously, John reached for the glass door, his hands shaking as he unlocked it. Just as he swung it wide, a sudden gust of wind rushed through, snuffing out their flashlights and plunging them into darkness. The doll sat still, but a strange, chilling presence filled the room, and the temperature dropped sharply. As they scrambled to turn their flashlights back on, Marcus noticed something odd. The doll's eyes, once facing forward, were now staring right at him. Confused, he blinked, but when he looked again, they were still fixed on him. "That's unsettling," he whispered, his voice trembling. Ben, the skeptic of the group, brushed it off as an illusion. Yet the tension in the air only intensified. As they stepped back to leave, the door slammed shut behind them, locking them in. Panic set in as they pushed against the door, but it wouldn't budge. Then, they heard it, a soft, eerie giggle echoing from the corner where the doll sat. Initially, they thought one of their friends was playing a prank, but soon they froze. The giggle morphed into a sinister laugh that filled the room. The walls felt like they were closing in, and the cold was biting. One by one, their flashlights flickered out, leaving them enveloped in darkness. The laughter continued, mixed with the unsettling sound of something, or someone, approaching that Sophia's voice shook as she called out, "Is anyone there? What's going on?" There was no reply, just their voices bouncing eerily around the room. Suddenly, the air felt suffocating, as if something unseen was watching them, the doll's gaze piercing through the shadows. Then, with a loud bang, the cabinet door flung open by itself, and the doll dropped to the floor, its empty eyes gazing up at them. But something was different. What had once been an innocent face now twisted into a grotesque grin, as if mocking them, while that faint, malicious laughter bubbled back to life. Without warning, the lights flickered on again, casting bizarre shadows on the walls. In those shadows, they glimpsed figures that looked like the missing girl, her face pale and contorted, with hollow eyes. As the figures drew nearer, the temperature plummeted, and their breath came out in visible puffs. The laughter became frantic, and it felt as if the room was constricting around them. The doll's eyes suddenly shifted again, this time targeting Lily, and before anyone could react, its hand shot out as if reaching for her. Lily screamed and stepped back, but the door they had longed to escape through was now wide open, revealing a darkness that beckoned. In a blind panic, they all rushed toward the exit, but the house twisted around them, the walls narrowing and the air thickening with a malevolent energy. They burst into the living room, only to find the doll perched on the mantelpiece, its eyes shining in the dim light. As they turned to escape, they heard footsteps behind them, slow, purposeful, and echoing eerily. They dashed for the front door, but it slammed shut with a thunderous bang just as they reached it. The doll's laughter echoed, and the lights flickered one last time before plunging them into complete darkness. They felt a cold, clammy touch brush against their shoulders and heard a whispered voice, "You shouldn't have come." As their flashlights finally died, the house fell silent, and the teens disappeared without a trace, their screams swallowed by the darkness. The following morning, the house remained eerily quiet, its windows dark. The doll, however, was never seen again, its presence lingering, waiting for the next group of curious souls to wander into its grasp. In the quiet town of Hollowbrook, tucked away in the woods, there was an old mansion that everyone whispered about, the decaying Blackthorn House. At the end of a narrow, tangled path, it loomed with boarded-up windows, a sagging roof, and walls that had long since lost their grandeur. Nobody knew just how long it had stood empty, but everyone was aware of the strange old man, Elias Blackthorn, who called it home. He was a mysterious figure, seldom seen, except for the occasional glimpse of a shadow through the grimy windows or a dark shape lingering in the doorway. The townsfolk shared stories about him in hushed voices, often suggesting that something unusual surrounded his home. Some claimed he had once been a skilled healer, while others said he practiced dark magic, which drove him to insanity. Yet, one fact was clear: people stayed far away from Blackthorn House. For years, odd happenings had plagued Hollowbrook, and many linked them to the old man. Animals would go missing, crops would die inexplicably, and on certain nights, a strange light would glow in the sky above the house. Eerie sounds like growls and scratching echoed from that direction, and some claimed they could hear something or someone scraping at the windows. But whenever someone ventured out to look, they found only the dark, silent house. One chilly autumn evening, a newcomer named Samuel grew weary of the town's fearful whispers and decided to explore the mysterious mansion himself. Ignoring his neighbor's warnings, he made his way down the overgrown path toward Blackthorn House, eager to find out what lay behind the fear that enveloped the town. As he approached, a chill crept in, the air growing colder and the forest eerily still. The trees loomed around him, their twisted branches casting long shadows as if they were reaching for him. When he finally arrived, the front door creaked open as if inviting him inside. He hesitated but ultimately stepped into the dark, damp hallway. Inside, dust filled the air, and the musty smell of mildew was overwhelming. As Samuel ventured further, he encountered strange sights. Old portraits whose eyes seemed to follow him, furniture that appeared to shift when he wasn't looking, and the faint sound of footsteps echoing in the empty house, even though he knew he was alone. His heart raced as he felt the weight of unseen eyes on him. Climbing the staircase, the air grew colder, and the floor groaned beneath him like it was protesting his intrusion. At the top, he found a door slightly ajar, with a thin sliver of light peeking through. Cautiously, he pushed it open and stepped into a room that seemed untouched for decades. In the center was an ornate chair, and as he approached, he noticed a figure seated there, Elias Blackthorn. With a hunched back, tangled beard, and tattered clothes, the old man seemed as if he hadn't changed in years. The silence in the room was palpable, broken only by a faint clock ticking in the corner. "You shouldn't have come here," Elias rasped, his voice chilling Samuel to the bone. "You've disturbed things that should never be disturbed." Samuel opened his mouth to respond, but before he could utter a word, the door slammed shut behind him with a deafening bang. Darkness enveloped the room, and the temperature dropped so quickly that he could see his breath. Panic set in as he tried to push the door open, but it wouldn't budge. Then he heard it, a low, guttural growl that seemed to echo from every corner. He turned around, but there was nothing there, just the dim candlelight casting strange shadows on the walls. The growl grew louder and more threatening, raising the hairs on the back of his neck. Suddenly, the walls felt like they were closing in, and he could hear clawed feet scraping against the floor as if something large was drawing near. Heart pounding, he stumbled backward and fell into the chair that Elias had occupied. It creaked as if someone or something were sitting in it now. The room began to spin, and the walls melted away, revealing twisted landscapes of dark forests and empty graves, with contorted figures reaching out with skeletal hands. The growling intensified, and something cold brushed against him, sending a jolt of fear through his body. He screamed, but his cry was lost in the darkness. Then, as quickly as it all began, everything stopped. Silence returned, and the door swung open, as if nothing had ever happened. Shaken, Samuel dashed out of the house, but the darkness seemed to follow him. Though the eerie light faded behind him, the sense of dread remained, assuring him he would never forget the horrors of Blackthorn House. The next morning, when the townspeople sought Samuel, they found him at the edge of the woods, his eyes wide with terror and clothes tattered. He couldn't speak or explain what he'd experienced, but the fear in his gaze told them everything. He vanished without a trace after that night. From then on, no one dared approach Blackthorn House, and strange happenings in Hollowbrook only increased. Livestock continued to disappear, crops withered, and the locals whispered of a curse on their town. They believed Elias Blackthorn was still there, that his spirit, or something darker, haunted the house, feeding off the fear of anyone who dared to enter. And so, the house remained, a dark reminder of the evil that once dwelled there, its empty windows staring into the night, waiting for the next unfortunate soul to wander too close. The Johnson family was ready for a new chapter, so they packed up and moved into a large, old farmhouse on the edge of a peaceful town. This Victorian beauty had been empty for years, boasting big windows and a lovely garden that seemed to invite them into a serene new life. John and Sarah, together with their 3 kids, Emma, 12, Ben, 9, and little Lucy, just 5, were thrilled about their fresh start. At first, it felt like a dream. The children ran through the rooms, giggling and discovering their surroundings, while John and Sarah quickly found their rhythm in this new place. But soon enough, Sarah started to notice some odd things. It was little stuff at first, a door that shut by itself, a flicker of light she couldn't quite catch, footsteps that echoed when no one was around. When she brought it up to John, he shrugged it off, thinking it was just stress from the move. Then things took a turn for the worse. Nightmares invaded their home. Emma would wake up screaming, claiming a shadowy figure loomed at the end of her bed. Ben insisted he heard whispers coming from the walls, and Lucy began talking about an imaginary friend, a tall, faceless man with eerie, hollow eyes. Unsettled, Sarah felt like the house was closing in on them. One night, while tucking Lucy in, she heard a strange scraping sound against the wall. She turned to see Ben in the doorway, his face ghostly pale and his eyes wide with fear. "Mom," he murmured, "the man is in the house again." Heart racing, Sarah tried to reassure him, but a nagging feeling of dread wouldn't leave her. In the days that followed, the strange events mounted. The kids grew increasingly distant. Emma stared out the window as if waiting for something to happen, while Ben began scribbling pictures of the faceless figure Lucy had mentioned. John, initially a skeptic, could no longer ignore what was happening. One night, alone in the living room, he heard footsteps above him along with faint whispers that seemed to call his name. When he went to investigate, he found everything quiet, but the air felt heavy with an unsettling energy. The next evening, Sarah was jolted awake by her children's cries. She rushed to their rooms and found them huddled together, eyes full of terror. When she asked what was wrong, they described an unseen presence lurking in the corner, its chilling stare making it hard to breathe. The following day, Sarah discovered a hidden door in the basement that she had never noticed before. It opened to a narrow staircase leading deep underground. Despite her fears, curiosity spurred her on. When she reached the bottom, she found a dusty old room with a large, cracked mirror at its center. As she wiped away the grime, her reflection flickered, and for a moment, she thought she saw a figure behind her, grinning grotesquely. Terrified, she stumbled backward, and as she attempted to leave, the door slammed shut behind her with a thunderous noise. Struggling to open it, she felt something cold brush against her arm, and when she looked, dark, claw-like scratches marred her skin. Eventually, she forced her way out and rushed upstairs, finding John and the children in the living room, staring at the fireplace with ashen faces. "We saw it too," Emma whispered, trembling. "The man in the mirror. He's been here all along." From that moment, their lives spiraled into chaos. The dark presence in the house only grew stronger, casting a shadow over everything they did. John and Sarah lost the ability to sleep. As the house creaked and groaned at night, cold spots drifted through rooms, and whispers intensified, like a haunting chorus beckoning them to join. Emma, once so brave, turned into a shadow of her former self. Her eyes were vacant and haunted. Ben began sleepwalking, wandering the house aimlessly, mumbling nonsensical words, while sweet little Lucy fell disturbingly quiet, her cheerful nature replaced with an eerie blankness. One stormy night, as wind howled and thunder shook the house, Sarah heard children laughing in the distance, followed by footsteps approaching down the hallway. She raced out of bed but froze in terror when she reached the stairs. At the bottom stood the faceless figure, its dark, hollow eyes locked onto her. The air reeked of decay as her heart thundered in her chest. Suddenly, the figure lunged, cold hands wrapping around her throat, choking her. In her panic, she fought back, but it was too strong. Just as she struggled, she heard John's voice calling from behind, and for a fleeting moment, she thought he was there. But when she turned, only darkness remained. With a surge of panic, Sarah broke free and stumbled back into the living room, where she found the children huddled together. John was there too, but his expression was twisted in horror. his eyes dark and empty. It was as if he had been consumed by the malevolent force haunting their home. Trapped within those walls, the family felt the darkness tightening around them, whispers growing louder, and a faceless figure lurking nearby. They realized with dread that the house was more than just haunted. It was alive, thriving on their fear, dragging them further into its grasp. Yes, they screamed for help. The walls seemed to close in, sealing their fate and binding them to the curse that had plagued the house for generations. The townspeople never mentioned the Johnson family again, and Blackthorn House stood in silence, waiting for its next unsuspecting residents, its hunger far from sated.